Hello, pod smashers of the internet, and welcome to another episode of
A D-Bit Pod Smash.
Where Gaming Goes to Grab a Beer.
We are your hosts, Penguin and Termite. I am Penguin.
I am Termite, and we are a weekly video game podcast, smashing together ideas that you care about with video games.
That's right, and tonight we are talking about beta testing. We did a episode on QA a while ago, like actual game testing and game testers. And that was more from the professional testing standpoint, from the people who are hired to do the thankless job of debugging all of our favorite games. This episode is going to be similar and cover some of the same ground, but it's going to specifically be from the point of view of user testing, gamer testing, or what is often referred to in the industry as beta testing. And it is a slightly different approach to the topic because beta testing has a whole component of who do you let into the beta test, and that is going to be kind of the meat of our episode. So we will get into all that and more, but we are where gaming goes to grab a beer. So what are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking a seasonal release by Lagunitas. Lagunitas being, awesome,
yeah, a little
awesome
something.
brewery. It's called, they do make a little something. This is called the Waldo's Special Ale Triple IPA. And here's what it says on the bottle. In 1971, the Waldos met one afternoon at 4:19 as to not be late and set out in a 1966 Impala armed with a treasure map on a journey to find a spot near Point Reyes. They never found that spot, but they kept looking. The dankest and hoppiest beer ever brewed at Lagunitas was made with the help of the Waldos for all treasure hunters. That's it.
Ooh, fun.
And a triple IPA this is like more IPA than Hop Slam, even from Bell's, if you've had that.
Wow.
This is
I don't
a
know what that means,
mouthful
but
of hops. It's just ridiculous. And it's 11%, so that should be fun.
So many IBUs.
I would like to know what the IBUs are. I'm trying to find it.
Oh, does it not have it?
It's got to be off the charts. But go ahead.
Yeah, I'm drinking. This is going to not be a particularly thematically fitting beer for when this episode airs, but for today, given what happened across the state, this is a very thematic beer. It's Sam Adams Cold Snap. And since you guys had snow today,
we did.
I'm going to date the episode right now, April 18th. That's not even mid-April. That's late April as far as I'm concerned. Rounding up, it's late April. So, what the heck? What the heck? We'll get into that a little bit more. But Cold Snap, I had this year, some point, probably around Christmas, probably around winter, and I think I might like it better than Oktoberfest if I'm being real, as far as Sam Adams beers go.
Really?
It's got the sediment stuff in it, and so anyways, I saw it at Food Lion, and I was like, this is probably it was on the the grab and go shelf or whatever. So I was like, I'm going to grab one of these because this might be the last I'll get this year because it's, once again, freaking April. So, yeah, I love this beer. And I'll read the thing, though, real quick. Cold Snap, unfiltered and lively. This crisp white ale gets a kick from bright blend of smooth spring spices. Yeah, this is such a drinkable beer, right? It tastes, it's got that good beer taste, but not overwhelming or too bitter. And it's got the sediment in it, but it's not grainy or sandy, so it's got a little bit of body to it, and it's got a good flavor, and it's just solid. So I'm gonna be sad to see it go, but I'm glad there was actually snow today, so I could tie it into reality. Cold snap, exactly.
Ridiculous.
So, all right,
Virginia weather. Stupid.
I know. I feel like this is even exceptionally weird this year, because I'm not going to say it's global warming necessarily, though I'm sure that has something contributing to it. It's probably not a direct one-to-one correlation. It's probably small, tiny, chaotic elements that have just sort of all kind of contributed, global warming being one of them. But dude, how long is it going to be before we're going to be yep, and it's one of those weird July snowstorms? Virginia weather, so silly. But it's going to be 80 tomorrow. That's insane.
Are you serious?
What is going on? Yeah, or from what my understanding is it's going to be 80 degrees tomorrow.
Oh my god.
Or at least by the end of the week. I don't know if it's directly tomorrow, but so yeah. Virginia weather, it's at this time of year. We don't have, by the way, for those out of state listening to us, we don't have fall or spring anymore. We just have winter, summer, and chaos.
Yep.
2 chaos months.
It. Yep.
Yeah, that's it.
It's completely unpredictable. It shifts wildly between super hot and cold. We had 70-degree days in December, folks. Like,
yeah,
it was ridiculously hot.
Oh yeah, December
Way
is
too
just
late.
like, yeah, December in Virginia is basically like oh gosh, what would it be like October, I think, for the rest of the country, where it's like probably going to be 70 degrees most of the month, and then like the occasional cold day.
Yep.
Crazy. I suppose it's not. I suppose there are plenty of like other southern states that are like warm all through December, but yeah, that's weird. Weird stuff, guys. Well, let's not talk about the weather. That's like what old people talk about. Let's talk about something else. Do you have anything else you want to talk
about? I do want to rant about my experience with Wonderlands and getting the platinum, but also like the extreme left turn that happened that expedited the whole process. So like there are these chaos runs. It's the end game content. The story was hilarious. I enjoyed my entire stint through all of it. Leveling a character from 0 to the end of the game was great. I got to the end of the game, rounded up some of the other trophies. Like there's some like grindy thing. Go do 7 of these doors. Go do the encampments. Go do the side quests, which were fun. And then there's these chaos runs, and there's levels 1 through 20. And to unlock the next level, you have to do a very specific chaos trial. And what they don't explain at all in the game is that you can turn on the chaos level as like a state of game, and it like sends you through a loading screen. So you warp into the world, you press start, you tab over to chaos, and you have to turn the level up to its max. And then it reloads your game, and then like all the enemies are buffed for everything, whether you're playing single player through story things, or if you're doing the trials. So there's like the trophy there's 2 of them, one for level 1, or 3 of them, one for level 1, one for level 10, and one for level 20. And in order to unlock the next level, you have to complete a trial at the max level. And that's all it says. And that's all the tutorial tells you. What they don't explain is like the bugs and glitches behind everything, where you spend 25 to 30 minutes running through a chaos trial, and then you dumped back out into the main world and you don't get the next level. It didn't happen for whatever reason. So there's all these workarounds online, and you have to like make sure your max chaos level is set before you talk to the NPC, and make sure you cycle through all of that person's options before starting a trial. And then before you enter the portal, make sure the next level you have not yet unlocked or something is there. It's ridiculous and infuriating to waste an entire like half hour of your time doing this crap. Also, the rate at which you get gear and the extreme overwhelmingness of the combinations of your main class, your secondary class, and all the different things you can get make it darn near impossible to sift through the tons and tons of gear that drop constantly, making all of them feel worthless and a waste of my time and overwhelming. So like stuff is just flying out of every enemy, every boss, every reward. And I'm like, I don't know if this is actually better. There's all this hidden stuff, and like you can combine things and stuff affects everything else. And like your skill trees will affect certain guns. And I was just like, done. I was so done. I was furious at this game. My chaos levels weren't working. I was jumping into online games, redoing runs over and over again, wasting my time. I can't get better. I can't kill anything on my own. So I'm relying completely on online stuff. Unless I like sit down and do D&D DM level work on a spreadsheet with character sheets, stat tracing, like spells to gear, and I'm not doing that. I want to play video games. I want to turn my brain off and make progress. So I was messaging you, slacking you, like furious over and over and over again, like how worthless this entire grind is. And then I jumped into a game. It's crossplay, of course. So there's folks on Xbox, there's folks on PC and on PlayStation all together. Someone dropped some modified weapons that kill everything immediately, and even a spell that explodes around you. So anything in like a radius around you will die instantly, regardless of level. And I very quickly grinded, it's the past tense of grind, from 9 to 20 in 2 hours. And that should have taken like 5 to 10. So sharp left turn, I got the level 20 thing, I was done, and then I finished up the platinum and got it all over with. And now I'm okay. And the game was fun, but I never want to do those stupid chaos trials ever again. And they need to fix their crap. Gearbox, get on it. Rant over.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't have nearly as much trouble with it. Borderlands is always pretty overwhelming with the gear and the character builds and stuff like that. So like that was to me just kind of par for the course. I looked up a build that worked for me, and then I was able to beat the game and platinum it before the patch where they nerfed the two best guns. So I just used
Lucky.
those two guns. And I didn't really have a problem. So I have no idea how. I know you said that liquid cooling sucks now, and that's what my general
It's
understanding
awful.
was.
It's just like, it's
well,
wrecked.
before it was just like its big shtick is that every time it crits, it cools off the heat, right? So you can fire it infinitely as long as you can crit them.
Yeah.
And my build was built around doing crits, so it was all just like, and so and then it did enough damage with the crits where it was just like it shredded things. But I mean, it's still tough. It was still annoying, and I didn't have nearly the trouble you do with the chaos levels and not getting the right level. There were a couple times it happened, but every time I chalked it up to me forgetting to do like double check the thing. It shouldn't have to be done in the first place. Like the game,
Right.
if you're doing a chaos trial, the assumption is you're going for the next level. There's this basic quality of life stuff, but yeah, I don't know. I enjoyed it, but it was not my favorite like Borderlands experience either. I think they made some really cool changes that need to be carried over into Borderlands 4. The spells instead of grenades were freaking awesome. I really hope they do like Arsenal or something like that, right? Where it's like it could be grenades, but it could just be like a launcher on your shoulder or something. Like it could be a bunch of different ways they could do that in like a sci-fi setting as well. So that needs to change. And then melee weapons, of course, were awesome. Customizing your character was pretty fun too, although I could take it or leave it, right? Like I also like the fact that like the Borderlands characters are like actual characters.
Right.
But yeah, no, other than that, the overworld was cool. I like the idea of the overworld instead of like having to and I feel like they could have taken it even further. But we'll get to that some other time. We'll probably be doing a review soon. But yeah, those are kind of my first impressions where it was fine. It was fine. It wasn't amazing. It was probably better than Borderlands 3 in some ways, but also not as good in other ways because they don't like have as much endgame content, and the endgame content they do have is the trials, and they suck. So like, yep, I'm with you, man. It was kind of a mixed bag for me, but still fun. So I enjoyed my time with it, but I'm also enjoying Mass Effect now. So
what I think will happen is I will cool off before DLC is announced. And then what I can do is use my modified weapons to grind level 20 chaos runs over and over again to get the gear that I want. And because I have cooled off from everything, I'll actually do and have the motivation to like look up a build and say, okay, I'm going to grind level 20 chaos runs with these hacked weapons, killing everything super quickly, collect a bunch of legendaries, build up a character, and then hit the DLC like kosher with good gear, not cheating stuff. And then have a good time because I'll know I'll have a good build with a good set of weapons, and then like be able to experience the story and then continue to build off of whatever new gear they add. So that could be fun. I think that's my course of action now. I did not buy the season pass yet, but I'd like to. That's my future with Wonderlands because I'm with you. It was a good game. It was fun. I want to play more.
Nice.
Not right now, though.
Well, all right. Well, Wonderlands is not necessarily our favorite thing. An okay, fun, enjoyable thing, but not our favorite thing.
80-bit Pod Smash is our favorite thing.
80-bit Pod Smash is our favorite thing.
Favorite
things is a segment of our show where we just kind of key you in on something that we are excited about, that we're digging, that we are inspired by or intrigued by. And it's a chance for us to share that with you so that you might be inspired to go out and find your next favorite thing. What's your favorite thing?
My favorite thing is we bought this house that was built without a buyer. And so everything in this house was very standard builder, everything, very generic and vanilla. And there were some renters, and then we bought it and moved in. And we have completely disconnected from the building process, left us with closet spaces with nothing but the standard wire rack that you get at the top. So nowhere to hang any clothes anywhere in the house, and no cabinets with which to put linens or fold and put away clothes without bringing in extra furniture. So what had happened was back in January, we had contracted a closet company to come out, take measurements, and assess, and we bought closet space stuff. And they came in this past weekend and they built all of our closets in, and now we have shelves and we have drawers all built into our closets, and they are wonderful and amazing. And I'm very excited to reorganize our entire house to reduce clutter and get things more optimized and where they should be. So that's my favorite thing. Closets.
Sweet.
I am old.
All right.
This is what we get excited about.
My favorite thing is my mother-in-law came over for Easter, and she brought my son some goodies and some toys. And the one thing he did not like immediately love and take to and play with the whole weekend was a hat she bought for him. And the hat she bought for him was totally a me hat, like totally a Silly Hats Only hat. And I love it. It's a penguin, and it's got like cat paws that come down, like dangle down next to your shoulders. And the cat paws, you can squeeze them. They have little squeezy bits in them. And if you squeeze them, the little flippers on the penguin will go up and down. It's awesome and hilarious. And it fits me, and I love it. And my son ignored it, didn't care about it. So I'm like, mine. So it's my favorite new hat, and I want to wear it all the time. And maybe I'll wear it on our stream this month, which should have just happened. So maybe you'll see it in that stream. And if you haven't seen it, then do that. It's fun. So, yep, that's my favorite thing. Pretty simple this week. So let's move on to our next segment, which is DLC. DLC is a segment of our show where we have a fun mini sub-discussion that may or may not be related to the main topic. And this one's weirdly tangentially related, but it's more closely related to what we just talked about in our banter, which was Wonderlands being broken. My DLC, I call it Fix Your Faves. And it's basically the premise of this DLC is pick a game franchise that you love that has some flaws, like recognizable, noticeable flaws, whether it's old game design or whether it's needlessly obtuse game design, and basically say, how would you fix that game to make it better and more in line with modern game design and more in line with like pro consumer game design. But it's like you still love it, you adore it, we know you love it and adore it, but like how would you kind of tweak it to make it a little bit better? That's the premise of this DLC. So I was inspired actually by our conversations with Wonderlands for this, and just thinking in general, what does Gearbox need to improve upon? So that will essentially be my answer, and so I can go if you need more time to think.
I was just thinking of like so many video games in the N64 era that are dear and near to my heart. Stuff like Star Fox 64, Ocarina of Time, obviously Conquer's Bad Fur Day, which some of these games have gotten this treatment, but like bringing them forward to like 60 frames per second and proper camera controls and like moving around, responsiveness. I know the Z targeting in Ocarina of Time has been iterated on and essentially has been fixed. But if it could be retrofit back to Ocarina of Time, I'll use that as my example because Legend of Zelda is my favorite single franchise. So why not go with Ocarina of Time, arguably the best Zelda game ever, and say the Z targeting, the lock-on system, and the camera combined. If they could just bring modern game design and modern controls to that and increase the frame rate to 60, it would be beautiful, gorgeous, and it would still it has not aged well. The remake on 3DS is actually the best version of it that you can get right now, and that's locked on a 3DS platform that is like dying, and Nintendo's cutting the servers and the eShop anyway. You can't buy it digitally. So that's it. That's fix my fave. Go back to Ocarina of Time, replace the Z targeting system, fix the camera, increase the frame rate, make it pop. And the Nintendo Switch Online service has like the graphical smoothing that's kind of nice, but I'm not really in for graphical smoothing. So do the other things. That's what I want.
Nice. Yeah, for me, I feel like I think I had this conversation with you in addition to talking about Wonderlands. There are other games I feel like I've said multiple times. There's so many games that I don't see why more games haven't adopted the adventure mode from Diablo 3. Like, a lot of games have done the Rift thing, right? Where they basically like, this is kind of like a timed run that's all dependent on your ability to kill things fast. Like, I've seen that in a lot of games, but they seems they forget the other part that made adventure mode great was the bounties, where it would like open up the map, and on your waypoints on your map, there were a bunch of like things that you could go do for the day. And it got you out into the world already using content and assets that they had made. All they had to do was throw some just like unique bosses out there that were also just reskins of other bosses. And like it was fun to go like back out into the world and do stuff, and made it feel like the whole game had like stuff. And they also made it so you could like go do adventure mode after, like with other characters, after you'd already beat the campaign. So you didn't have to do the campaign over and over again. You could just do. And I feel like Borderlands could have used that. Freaking Elden Ring could have used that. I don't know about Outriders Endgame, but like I'm sure Outriders and Destiny could have benefited from a system like that. It's just like it feels like something that should have been copied, and then iterated on, made better, right? But instead, it just seems like it's been an entire part of RPG, action RPG, games as a service games that has been ignored and like not like utilized when it was like a shoe-in. I was for sure it would have been a shoe-in system for so many of these games. But I mean, and speaking specifically on Borderlands, it's just like the game really needs to break out of its own like traps of itself, right? Like it's like there are things that are like, okay, this is identifiably a Borderlands game, where it's like, okay, this needs to not be identifiably like a thing they do anymore. I think of things like the like waiting for things to like dialogue to happen while instead of progressing. It's like, no, let me go forward. There's a lot of games that have that too. Horizon Zero Dawn still has that, where you have to like sit there and like get exposition by like looking at characters talking at their faces. I'm playing through Mass Effect now too, and it's like it's a problem there too. It's like, no, like there are so many different ways to give exposition and tell stories, and I don't have to stare at a talking head talking at me. It's boring. That's not interesting at all, right?
Unless it's done correctly, like Last of Us Part 2 or Ghost of Tsushima.
I feel like those games are like, yeah, but they're like cinematics though, right? Like they happen in cutscenes. Yeah, right.
That's
cutscenes are interesting because you can make cutscenes look interesting and you make cool things happen in cutscenes.
Yep.
But I'm talking about that thing where you like have dialogue choices with a wheel,
right?
And like while you're doing that, it's just like cut to one character's face doing nothing but staring.
That's boring.
You know, like what do you call it? Uncanny valley into the distance. And Borderlands doesn't have that, but what it does have is it has you sitting there watching characters talk or like stand there giving exposition while nothing is happening. And it's like, and this is the game that also has like the comms where they can talk to you while you're doing stuff. Like, why not just that? Why not just do that? And give me something to do while I'm sitting there listening to the exposition, because I'll pay attention. It's ridiculous. It's insane. I'm like, there's so many things that are just like, okay, this is just dumb. Why are we still doing it this way? The multiple playthrough thing is just tedious when the games are so long. It's like, no, just give me a way to jump in with another character and I'll still level up. I'll do the leveling up thing, but give me a different way of doing it, because I don't want to do the whole campaign over again. So
yeah, and even with like adventure mode in Diablo 3, which is a mode that's difficult to describe if you don't know what Diablo 3
what is already. Yeah, exactly.
It's so hard. Like I was just thinking, like as you were talking, what is this adventure mode? How do you describe it? And it basically like opens up the entire world to you from level 1. And it doesn't lock you into a story progression at all, but there's 5 acts, and each act is kind of a different biome, if you will. And each of those acts have 5 goals in them with this adventure mode. And it can be like loot this dungeon. It can be fight this boss. There's a bunch of different objectives you can do. And there's no linear like lock in. You can do it as you want, anywhere you want, fast travel to the act, load the level, and go do the objective. And loot comes out like crazy, and people will speed run from level 1 to max in like no time. And then the rest is just like gear grinding for like the season's set gear for your class. So there's constant rotation of good gear, super fun, like creative builds that change the way you would play your character. And then you take all of that and you go to the trials and see how fast you can defeat the hardest dungeon runs. And it's all built together seamlessly, and it's very unique. And it's, like I said, it's hard to explain what it is. And no other game has done this. And it's so fun. Like once you beat the game once in Diablo 3, adventure mode is all you will use for the rest of that, because there's no reason to go through the story again unless you just want to like go through the story again for like nostalgia's sake. But it's a way to add content and engagement and time to the game without feeling repetitive, because it is mixed up. Each of the little 5 objectives across the 5 acts are all different every time you do it. So like it's really cool. I don't know. It's like I said, it's hard to explain, but Borderlands could definitely benefit from it.
Yeah, for real. So, all right, well, that's how we would fix our faves. We want to hear from listeners as to how would you fix your favorite games. Again, this is not criticizing your games and saying that they're garbage. This is, well, it is criticizing, but it's like, it's critical analysis. It's saying, all right, I understand no game is perfect and it has flaws. So what are ways you would improve those flaws? Were you the one in charge? What would you like to see? Yeah, we want to hear all those thoughts on how you'd fix your faves and more. And Termite will tell us where you can do that if you have ideas.
You can fix Penguin's favorite From Software games by telling them they should add easy mode to all of them by going to 80bitpodsmash.com 80bitpodsmash.com, 80bit podsmash, and find links to all of our social media platforms where you can debate about how hard From Software games are and how they could benefit from so much more at Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, and Twitter, as well as links to, if you're finding us by way of YouTube or Twitch and you want to know more where we are, we have a weekly video game podcast that launches every Monday at midnight, and you can find that through our podcast services, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, etc. There's an RSS feed link on our website that you can throw into any third-party app. So please hit us up. There's also a Discord server, so you can jump in there and interact with us live. And we're usually pretty good at responding and carrying on conversations. So when they happen, they are active for a while. So come do that. Join our community, join our friends, and tell us what you think of our show and give us our feedback. 80bitpodsmash.com, 80bit-podsmash.com.
Huzzah. All right. Well, then we are talking, like I said, about beta testing tonight, or like I put in our main topic, and I thought this was pretty clever. To beta or not to beta? That is the question. Because it's just 2 letters away from. It's not funny if I have to explain the joke. Beta testing. What would you define a beta test to be? What is a beta test? I'll say that for the purposes of this episode, though there may be a more highly specific answer, I'm going to say that in general, we're talking about like general user testing for video games, right? So not just like, so it could be a network test, it could be early access, but the essential point here is that the users, the consumers themselves, are the ones who are testing it and ideally giving feedback. The purpose is for the purpose of feedback, not, for example, a demo, which is more like this is not meant for feedback. This is to give you a taste, to get you hyped to the game, make you want to buy it, right? A beta test sort of has that assumption of like, this is an unfinished state, so temper your expectations. That's kind of my thought there. What,
and it
what
has
would you
evolved
say?
over time, like over years and years, what the beta test has been in the past. Especially prior to like mobile gaming and prior to the always connected online video game consoles. A beta test was a nearly complete version of a game that was outsourced to hired individuals that were paid to play this game to kind of start talking about bugs and glitches, as well as just how the game played cohesively over from like beginning to end. So it was closer to the completed state than like your alpha tests or your internal tests, etc. But now, like the race to the bottom and like free to play and always online things, especially with games as a service and live service games, constant like push in the direction of increasing its multiplayer. You can't really test the multiplayer components or the servicey components without a huge player base, and that just got to be too cost prohibitive to hire like a company to add 1,000 people to play the game. So the idea of an early access or a demo and a beta all kind of have gotten kludged together from like, I would say like 2010 to now. It's really gotten out of hand, where now demos are coming out that are essentially beta tests that are masked as a fun, consumer-friendly preview of a video game, but really they're just collecting a ton of data on you to optimize their game engines and heat maps. And so it's gotten that it's crazy, like what a beta test is now. But essentially it is prior to its official release date, whether it's early access, beta, or demo, you, the player, are contributing something to the development team beyond just your self. You're not a consumer at that point, you are the product. So you are providing a company with valuable information, what you do, how you do it, and you sign the license agreements and the end user license agreements and all those things at the onset of this beta. And so instead of having to write like a long bug report or some sort of review, you actually just give them all the data that you're using behind the scenes, and you don't even know, you're none the wiser. You just have a good time. So that's what beta testing is. Mm-hmm. I think I've captured that at least.
Yeah, I think so. That's pretty good. We didn't answer why is it important. You kind of answered it, but again, what is like you said, it saves the company costs, but like, why is it important to do a massive test like this, right? Like you can really nail. There's one piece that I'm kind of looking for in regards to like what benefit does it give? Like why is this part of the process?
And now it's, well, like I said, there's the cost of game development has gotten so high. Just developing a video game, period, that plays online is so costly that using the beta test on the mass market is a great way to get feedback on quality assurance, bugs, and testing, as well as your online infrastructure and whether the game works like cover to cover.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way, even with like a massive testing staff, like there's no way you're ever. I mean, if you could just hire a massive testing staff, then like it would defeat the purpose of like selling a game to a bunch of people. Maybe, I don't know. The bottom line is like you're never going to be able to catch everything. The players will probably catch everything eventually, right?
Yep.
Like that's just what we do. Like even if we, as 30-year-old dudes with the families, don't do it, like some, I say this lovingly, but some nerds out there are gonna like go figure it out and find the bugs, right?
Because they're gonna get
like,
the edge cases and the outliers.
That's what enthusiasts do, right? Is they go in and they poke until they break it, which is exactly what QA folks do, if you remember from our episode about it. So so again, it is one of the best ways to just catch things. And like as far as like stress test goes, you're never going to know if your servers or your network infrastructure is going to be able to handle it if you don't just dump a bunch of players on there. So that's kind of what the kind of that's why it's important, is it does ultimately improve the product, but it gets dicey, it gets complicated, and it gets a little controversial. And we're gonna put a button in that because we'll get back to it. Let's instead move on to our second question, which is, what are the different kinds of beta tests? And what are those different beta tests trying to accomplish with their various setups? So I have a bunch listed here. There's the closed test. This is sort of the invite only, like you select people, and the purpose of it being closed is because they want to get feedback from specific people. So maybe that's influencers, people who, also who like are a third party, that this game's going to be their life. So they're going to want to make sure that they have a different insight than someone who is, playing it on the weekends for giggles, right? Like, so like there's some people that they'll invite to the closed test in order to make sure like they have a different, or the journalists too, in order to kind of give them a sort of basis upon which to write their reviews before the game comes out. Those are kind of the purposes of closed tests.
Yeah, this is like your controlled market. You want to grab metadata about who is playing, what age group are they in, what race, what gender, how often do they have, and so using the closed way, putting up gates and controlling what data you get. So when you throw out a mixture of that, you can do your assessment. You can change your game more. And so when you want to know what the min maxers are going to do, the people who are the enthusiasts versus like the casual folks and you want to market, it's all like back to marketing and PR. So if you know that this game is going to appeal to your sports fans, like you can do a closed beta, and you can kind of gate like how many players are playing this version of Madden have played previous versions of Madden. I want a controlled set of very veteran players, or I want a controlled set of like new players. And so a closed way, you can control how you close it. It's very different, but it is through signups and through surveys and all those things. So you get a lot of extra data that's not just the game engine, it's not just the game itself, but like who is playing as part of closed beta tests.
Yep. Open tests are the opposite, though. Open tests,
everyone's
open it up
in.
To everyone. Yep, and those are for some of these other ones we'll talk about, things like network tests and stress tests. We already mentioned those. Purposes, of course, being to just flood the system with as many schmucks as possible, just to see what the heck happens. So they'll usually, like, again, curate a very small section of the game. Sometimes it's the same as the closed test. Sometimes, these things come in phases, which is the next one we'll talk about. But it'll be a slice of the game, and it'll get so it'll get you now. It's incentivizing for the players to get their hands on the game for the first time, and it's mutually beneficial, because then the people who need the data, the infrastructure teams and stuff like that, they need to know if they need to spin off some more servers and or buy some new hardware. And the network team needs to be able to figure out if all those players hitting it at once is going to cause, like, if their infrastructure is ready to handle that, right? Like if they have enough stuff. And know that there's not some random, I work in IT, so I know that, crap, we forgot to open a port on this thing, and now nobody can access the game because the entire system is crashing when people try to log in. Like
matchmaking,
like 9
guys.
times out of 10.
Gosh,
right, exactly.
Remember that Diablo, like right at launch, there was the Air 73 or whatever it was for like days, and everyone was furious because it was online only all the time. You couldn't play it single player, and it was just like, it was a huge mess. Welcome back to
exactly.
Yeah, that's why you do network tests and stress tests and beta tests for these things.
Yeah, for real. So cool. Well, then, that's the kind of what the next one I was talking about is the phases. So sometimes, again, sometimes it can be for the purpose of being like, okay, we'll do a closed test to select curated people, then we'll open it up. Phase 2 will be open tests, but sometimes they actually do phase tests of the content. So they'll do like, okay, well, so for this week, we're going to be testing just PvP. So people who log in, they'll only have access to the PvP content. Everything else will be blocked out. Then we'll open it up to the raiders for, if it's like an MMO, it's like, okay, and the raiders, they'll do their phasing of testing, and then, quests, blah, blah, blah. So they're basically testing chunks of the game at a time so they can get feedback on specific areas that they need to work on or get feedback on. And that's kind of that's like a form of phased beta testing. I don't really see that much anymore, except in those bigger like MMO games. I think they still do stuff like that.
And another flavor of phased tests are opening up from going from closed beta testing to open using the same chunk of game. It'll be phased in that regard with like how many people can come in. So there'll be like, those who pre-ordered the game can get access to it earlier, but then those who don't, now it becomes more open. So it starts from closed and it goes to open with the network test, with the stress test, with different aspects. Maybe they throw in a new map, so they phase it in that regard too. It's a different flavor of the same word, but yeah,
absolutely. Cool. And then there's the early access. This is slightly different. This is where the game like comes out early, right? And you buy it. You buy it for, like on Steam, you'll buy it for $20. And you are now playing the game, but the game is, again, it's all being advertised and it's all being presented to you as this is a unfinished product. We are still adding to it. So you should expect things to change over time, improvements, content to completely change. I think of Baldur's Gate 3 was an early access game. Yep. It just recently came out of early access, right?
I don't know if it did yet.
Or it's close to it, I think. It might be coming out of it soon. I was looking at it because for our D&D campaign, I was trying to find character creators, and like Baldur's Gate 3 is going to have all the races and customization for those races. And I was like, oh, that would be perfect. But I don't want to spend money on Baldur's Gate 3 just for that. So, but yeah, I was like, I was like, oh, it's coming out early access soon. Because it was weird because I was like, I thought it was already out, but it's been in early access it's been out, but it's been in early access. And that's the weird thing about early access, right? Is there's lots of games that will be announced. And then it's like, oh, I can't wait till that comes out. And then, oh, surprise, it's out, but it's not out. It's in early access. It's like a weird form of beta testing where they're getting you to buy a product before it's even out and test for you. You're paying them to do work for them. It's a weird thing, but it exists, and it exists for a reason, meaning it's successful in some games, especially like indie games and stuff, where the creators are confident that the product they have is good enough to buy, even if it's, quote, not done. So can definitely save you on, like,
to me is a synonymous with Steam for some reason. Like every cool little game that you like, oh, it looks fun, I want to play that. Oh, it's in early access. To me, it's a turnoff. I don't want it in early access. I want it to come out. I want like I want it to be done, and I want to buy the game. I know sometimes early access is also discounted, so sometimes it'll be like 15 or 20, and then when it does come out, it goes up to like 30 or 40 as like it's MSRB, which when you're on a digital PC platform, MSRB is a joke because it's always on sale somewhere and you can find it cheap. That's how that ecosystem works. But yeah, I don't know. Like early access has its benefits, and I know it's beneficial and good in some ways, but to me, I that's not a good word. When it's in early access, I just kind of eye roll and move on. Come talk to me when the game's out. And that's exactly how I approached Baldur's Gate 3. I was like, early access, I don't want to do that. I'm not paying money. I'm not paying to be a beta tester. I'll play for free, and I'll give you my time and my data and all the privacy concerns, whatever. You have it all, because I understand that going into it. But like to throw down money and say, I'm buying this game and it be unfinished and they're taking all of that information, like, I don't know, it just doesn't sit right with me. And I usually kind of move away from things until they're officially out. But that's just me. And I know early access is not objectively wrong. It's okay. There's lots of benefits.
Yeah. If people like, if you tolerate that, that's fine. But I'm similar. But yeah, no, Steam has a lot of early access products. That's kind of where I first encountered it, and I was like, what is this? So cool. All right, and then there's sort of the quote unquote perpetual beta, where it's like we don't know when it's done, but you get to play it in the meantime. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this, but I saw it as something that I think it comes up more in the like actual software world, where it's like this is sort of in a perpetual beta state where we're always receiving feedback, so the build will still say beta, but it's like a product that's out. I think you'll see it a lot in like open source stuff, right? Like this is an open source product, so you're not buying a full-blown product, we're not advertising it as a full-blown product, but it's going to have like beta features because it's open source, so it always needs to improve. But I don't think we see that often in video games, but it's there. It's a term in beta testing, terminology. So you'll still kind of see it if you're ever like researching beta tests. But I don't know if you have any examples of this or anything you want to add to that.
I was trying to find an example as you were speaking, but I just know that games were in beta for a long time. I think of there's this sci-fi game. What was it called? But there was a game. It was supposed to be super ambitious and like the biggest. Oh, what was that game called? Because it was so hyped up in like 2014, 2015 timeframe. I don't remember. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll move on. But that's a game that's been perpetually in beta. It's not out yet still, and it's been in development. Double HE hockey sticks, whatever you want to call it.
Think development hell's a bad word.
It's forever. But anyway, go ahead. We'll move on.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, so this question's kind of similar. We kind of have already answered it in some regards, but this is taking a similar approach to the last question, but instead of just talking about the different types, we're specifically going to talk about how do companies determine who gets access to beta tests and why is this controversial. So what's slightly different about this question is it's more about like, okay, great. So we need to beta test, but like there's going to come the question, what are the different means of doing this? So some of this obviously is going to have some overlap with our last question, but some of these could also apply to multiple different kinds of tests on our, like a completely different approach to inviting people or like opening it up to those people on the same type of test. For example, I have seen both closed network tests where the purpose was to test the network and do stress testing, but it was closed, invite only. And I've seen also open network tests where the whole point was just open it up and let us, release the hounds kind of a situation. So that's kind of the approach to this is what are the different means by which companies will determine that? And why is the very notion of them having to decide that a controversial thing sometimes? So what are the different kinds of ways they do it? Obviously, there's the invite, insider, influencer only kind of thing where they approach people and it's not made like public that they're doing it. Sometimes it is made public where they'll be like, we're going to invite some select people. But the general idea is like the developers say, we want these people specifically and these people only to be part of this test, this closed test for whatever the purpose is. Blizzard had the famous like opt-in system where like they would still kind of choose randomly, so to speak. But
it was like a lottery.
They would only it was a mix between systems, but it was like they only chose if you opted in. So if you wanted to beta test, it's not like they would just choose take all their all their users and put them in a pool and pull names out at random. It was like you still had to like opt in. I want to be part of a test, and then that is where they got the pool from which to do the lottery. Obviously, we talked about the open system and how that works. Lottery system, we to elaborate further, you opt in or you sign up or whatever, and then your name is put in a hat. Sometimes it is just all the users. They put your name in a hat, and if you miss I feel like WoW did that for one expansion. I want to say BC. They just like did everybody, and then like that was so uncontroversial because so many people would get invites, and then like I didn't pay attention to my email, right? Like, or I didn't want to be part of it. Why did you give it to me when someone else could have had that spot that wanted it? So a lottery system doesn't have to be opt-in, but these days it's wise for it to be that way. I talked about influencers. Influencers are a little bit different from insiders, though, in the sense that like an influencer you're going to let into the game when it's at a state. You'll still probably want their feedback, but they're going to be presenting it to their audience, right? So there will be an aspect of like polish that wouldn't necessarily go to some like an insider who they're actually wanting their feedback because for an influencer is going to take the opportunity to do a hot take on how crappy the game is if it's in a bad state, whereas like an actual insider or someone who is like been invited to test it is you're doing it because you trust they're going to give good feedback. So that's why I kind of made it separate. And the last kind of method is the pre-order or some form of buy-in access. You want access to the game early, you got to pay for it, pre-order it, whatever. So why are these various access means controversial? Why do they cause drama for the various video game communities in which they take place?
I'll start with the influencer bend. There is a lot of false misinformation about like reviewer journalist companies like IGN being paid to review, and so their review scores are always padded. That's simply not true. If you go listen to the folks that work for IGN, they have many talks on various podcasts and also on Twitter where they refute that and they say why, and they have sources and they back it up with like actual criticism. But what I like about, the influencer model is their job is to like be an influencer, and if they get noticed by a company, that means you're doing something in that space most of them, I say most because there are like the off the wall influencers who are on their own, who are like on Twitter or YouTube and don't have a actual like company backing, that might say some crazy things and could be bought and paid for to say good things about stuff. But for the most part, you have an influencer who's in the industry, who's very knowledgeable, and this idea of them getting access to a beta test of a game is not really any different than them getting a early review copy, or say like Power Picks, who gets early copies of games to do trophy guides. And so there's a mixed bag here, which becomes controversial. But in that regard, I don't mind the influencers getting the early access, because usually the influencers are the ones on the show floors back when the expos were a thing in the before times. They were at PAX East, they were at E3, they were at the Games Developers Conference, they were at Gamescom, and they were at Tokyo Game Show, like playing the very early builds with the developers over their shoulders, like guiding them through their game so that they could write preview articles and like write things for their magazines. And most of the time I can trust the bigger names that are out there and understand their critiques. And like, but what's cool about the influencers is that you get their whole flavor.
All of them, though. You're talking like journalists, people who were effectively industry insiders, and that's not exactly everyone that's in the influencer space these days. You've got like these people who were basically just amateurs, who were just like gamers, right? Who then just got on Twitch when it was like brand new, and now have like thousands of followers because they were just like right place, right time, right? And had the right personality, right? I think PewDiePie, I think Ninja, I think
sorry for my
and really
bias.
No, right, exactly. But like I think of on the WoW side, I think Asmongold, Pokimane, like these people who are, I'm sure, fine people and are talented at their craft. I'm not crapping on them, but they wield an undue amount of power over these games simply because of the fact that they can, with a word, a snap of their finger, a whim, destroy a game. Because there are people who play these games because their favorite influencer plays them. They don't even necessarily enjoy the game. They enjoy being part of the community that the influencer, and that's like their bread and butter, right? So if they are just like, oh, this game has something I don't like in it, and it's maybe an unfinished state, it maybe is buggy because it's unfinished, it's not ready, you let that guy into your game because you want him to get some early hype on it it could backfire drastically if they don't like the direction. It may not even be a bug with the game. It's just like, they can just completely tank entire communities at a whim, basically, because and they're not professionals. They don't care. What they care about is clicks, likes, subscribes, follows, and money.
The caricatures like personified in Borderlands 3's villains. Them.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like I think Borderlands 3 was onto something with the influence. They might have been a little prescient. I don't think they did it well because the twins were annoying, but that was their only problem. The thing that they missed, the thing that Borderlands 3 missed with the criticism they're trying to do on streamers and influencers, was that influencers and streamers are not annoying. They may come across as annoying to people outside their spheres of influence,
right?
But to
they
people
have 200,000 followers because they're not annoying.
They're
like, people
popular,
like them.
Exactly.
Right.
People like them, right? And some of their behaviors might be annoying, but only if you are annoyed by them. If you're like, what would have been smarter is to actually they have charisma, right? Like, make them charismatic. Had they been made charismatic, performed by, competent voice actors, written by competent writers who made them cool people who you wanted to like, follow, and obey, then it might have had a bigger impact. Because like, we're now seeing what Borderlands essentially was trying to warn us of, which is these influencers just hold an absurd amount of power. And that's a whole topic for another time. So I'll just wrap it up by saying that like,
that's why this is controversial.
There is kind of there's two ends of that spectrum of like, beta testers. Is, you're right. On the one hand, you have influencers who are like serious journalists who know it, have been in it, and been involved in it, and they're influencers because their expertise can be trusted. I think of like Jason Schreier, the guys who, all these like Souls guys who like, this is their craft, right? Like the guys who do Fextra Life, the guys who do Vati Video, like these guys who have dedicated their lives to making content.
Colin
of Souls
Moriarty
games.
And Chris Raygun and Dustin at
Sure,
Sacred
all those
Symbols,
guys
who we're going to go see live, and Kind of Funny, and Alana Pierce, and
there's so many guys and people who are like actual professionals who know what they're talking about. There's also
and girls,
a dime a dozen.
Games, Andrew Renee. Brittany Brombacher.
Yeah. There's also a dime a dozen person who are also talented people who are good at their craft. And I'm not going to deny that. But their interest is not necessarily in making the games better. Their interest is in creating content that their consumers want to see. And that can go bad for the game really fast.
But related to beta testing, so like there are companies that will cater to that market, to what we've just described as like the problematic influencers, and make them the kind of shining child that gets to do the beta testing, and their influence isn't necessarily in line with the gamer's influence, and so you don't want their feedback affecting the game because that's the controversy.
Right.
That's the struggle with, like,
they make so much money that the game developers are going to cater the game choices to them as opposed to the average person. Their vote is more than your vote in that regard, right? Like, it used to be all of our votes were equal. All of our votes were $60, right? And we all paid our $60. And so therefore the game was going to be designed to get the most units of $60. Now, an influencer can bring so much more, or a single influencer can bring so much more money to a game than I can, that their opinion matters more than mine, objectively. And so the games are going to get made to cater to their opinion, not mine. And that can suck. And it can feel powerless. And if it, to take it to the extreme, it can result in an entire industry, basically you losing interest in an entire industry because, like, somebody was more popular than you. That is kind of crappy to think about. So, I mean, there's a lot of these that are pretty controversial beyond just the influencer ones, right? Like pre-ordering, it's clearly just like we had one of our first episodes was on the woes and dangers of pre-ordering. And so, like, this is just another way that they try to hook you into paying for a game you don't get to play yet. And that you've never, like, buying something that you have no idea if it's going to be good or not, just buying it off of the trust and goodwill of a developer. Yeah. Like, you're going to say, well, I get to get beta access to it. And okay, you're still paying your money to it, right? Like, you're still giving money to something that you don't know if it's going to be good or not, right? And that includes the beta as part of that. So it's like, I suppose you can cancel your pre-order, but like
the early access beta as an incentive to throw down your $60 early digitally to gain access to something early. And so they're using that as a selling and marketing tactic. And it's like, there's hundreds of millions of beta tests out there that are free, and because they're free because we're the product, not the consumer. But then businesses, publishers got smart, and they're like, oh, people will pay for this early access because they can talk about it early. They can talk about it on their platforms, on their social media platforms. They can talk about it on their podcasts. And so let's offer this, like, pre-order incentive. And I like to use actual examples. So I hate to go back in time, but just to talk about the influencer model doing the beta tests, Riot Games did that with Valorant. Valorant is the perfect example of a game that was beta tested by influencers only, and it has go look that up. And then for this pre-order gating that we've talked about now, EA is notorious for doing this with all of its Battlefield games, and then of course the Call of Duty line of stuff. And Ubisoft does this with some of their Rainbow Six games, like pre-order now for early beta access. And it's to get you online, it's to get your communities going, it's to learn the maps, it's to learn the player. Like Halo 343 Studios did this with Halo Infinite. It's all like, get in early. So pre-order now, throw down your money, pay for an incomplete game so we can glean all of the data off of you. Yes, it's unfinished and buggy.
It sucks.
Yeah, not balanced.
Yep. Lottery systems and stuff like that come with their own, like pitfalls. I think of the, I saw this is one of the things that inspired this episode. I saw this with the closed network test for Elden Ring. Is when you have a lottery system, you're basically creating you're creating a circumstance of artificial scarcity, meaning that there are going to be people who realize, oh, the more people who get in, like the more entries that get entered, the less likely any one individual is going to get one of those entries. And I have the advantage of writing bots and scripts and stuff to make more entries and stuff than the average person. I have access to more computers, more IP addresses, whatever they need to do, technologically speaking, and whatever lows they'll go to, technologically speaking, to do so. And then you basically end up with a scalping situation. So the more popular the game, the more anticipated the game, the more expansive and extensive and interesting the test is, the more demand it creates. And this became obscene and absurd with the closed network test for Elden Ring back in like October or whenever it was, because you had people scalping and selling closed network test codes. You had people begging. The subreddit was blown up with people just begging for keys, begging for codes, and just like the communities just went into complete chaos over something as stupid as a freaking closed network test. People just like having existential crises over freaking code to get into a game to play it a little bit early. Like, and Elden Ring is by far not the only game that like would cause that kind of pandemonium within a community. So like, yeah, when you have something where it's like, this is going to be rare, this is going to be scarce, and this is going to be like, and it's going to be random, given out to random people, there are going to be people who will abuse it. It's like, you don't want scalpers on your beta tests, because you don't want scalpers getting codes to your beta test, because like that defeats the point, because they're going to sit on them. They're going to sell them. They're going to try to sell it for the highest price. And like, it could be that no one gets it, and then that's one less data point, right? That defeats the entire purpose of having your test in the first place, because your purpose is to get as many data points logging in there as possible. And if you just have people sitting on those data points and trying to sell them for profit, they may never get sold, and like then you don't have a data point. So it's just like, ugh. So
yeah, and
it could
the
be
lottery
really
system is the blur between the closed and the open test. It's like open for everyone to apply. And then there's usually a survey attached to it, which has a ton of metrics that are like added to it. And then it's left up to the publisher or the developer to then decide from this pool of metrics, like what they're going to pull from and select. So it's not quite closed where it's like only this market gets in, and it's not quite open where everyone gets in. It's here's a lottery system, throw your email address in, take a survey. So when you do pass the codes on to someone else, that code is tied to your survey answer. So when you are a married mid-30s straight white dude with 2 hours a day max to play, and you sell your code for money to a very young, single, non-gender binary person who has all the time in the world or not, like very different outlook on life, very different entire perspectives, and very different free time availability. And so what they do in the game is going to be kind of shifting the point, right? It's like it messes with, that's why it's against the end user agreement. That's why it's against their rules, and they have every right to ban you if you get caught. So like, selling your codes through the lottery system, you're right. That's why it's controversial, because it does pit it pits the community against each other. It's like, oh, you have all these free things. You're a privileged person. Oh, how dare you? I earned this. I deserve this more than you. And then there's all this envy, and there's all this like guilt, not guilt, but jealousy, and like all those coveting and all those things that you would use to like turn the community on itself. But also, like, you can't even rely on the legitimacy of your data, because you don't know where the codes are coming from. You don't know if the person who answered the survey is actually the person claiming your code. And so it's a mess. Like, lottery
right.
systems,
and if you're
I guess,
sitting there thinking
work,
like, oh, this is silly. People legitimately fight over this over the internet. It's like, at least with the Elden Ring thing, like there was certain like a frenzy, a hype that started building before the codes were released, because they didn't know how many codes were going to come out. So it was sort of this sort of like, oh, are a lot of people going to get in, or only a few people going to get in? And there's sort of like a spiral that the community can go through psychologically. And I don't necessarily blame anybody for getting caught up in that spiral. I was sitting there trying to like refresh for codes for a little bit, not gonna lie. I eventually let it go. I was like, nope, it's just not worth it. It's not worth going down that path. It's disappointing.
I applied for the lottery. I took the survey and tried to get one. I was going to do it.
Yep.
But I had every intention to actually play the game. Like,
exactly. Thing. But I had to do what I tell my son, which is, if you're disappointed, just find something else to do, right? Like, that's what I had to like literally tell myself, because like I got caught up a little bit in the hype of it. I got caught up in all the frenzy of people like begging for codes. I didn't beg myself, but I still was refreshing to see if I could snag a code from someone, right? Like there was totally like a lot of that going on, and you can get caught up in the frenzy of that. And if the community gets whipped up and things go like post, like wherever your preferred social media of choice, like I can see it being something that gets out of hand. So cool. All right. Well, so with all of that in mind, should developers continue doing this? Like are beta tests worth it when there's all these pitfalls? And then kind of what are the best ways to do it? And then why do developers do beta tests, and why do developers not sometimes do beta tests? Why doesn't every game have a beta? This doesn't happen with every game. In fact, it's happening less and less. Why are the reasons why they do? Why are the reasons why they don't? And should they? Is kind of the crux of this question.
It's a lot of things to answer. Should developers do beta tests? Yes. Beta tests are helpful. Developers want to glean the data, the feedback. They want to test their game, test their code, test their network, stress test. They want to make sure everything works. Beta testing is perfect to do that. And there's a million different ways in which you can accomplish that goal. So should they still do that? Absolutely. Gaming is extremely expensive. To create a game is higher and more expensive than it's ever been, especially in the AAA space now. So yes, to mitigate costs and to make sure you have a quality release, beta tests should absolutely happen. And the way that they're happening has evolved and changed, and between the, like I said, 2010s through like 2017, 2018, I think was at its worst, and we are getting better now. I think beta tests aren't as shoved down our throats. Early access isn't shoved down our throats as much. It's not. We came out of an era, and I actually ranted to you on Slack about this for no reason at all. I don't know what was prompted. I had purchased a bunch of PS3 games like on the internet, like 8 games, and I was like going through them to make sure that they had their manuals and stuff. And I remembered because like 5 of them had a needless multiplayer code that you had to put into the PSN to gain access to the multiplayer aspect of this game. It did not need a multiplayer aspect at all, like Dragon Age. It's a single player RPG, but it had like enter this code to gain access to the multiplayer, and it was all this like extra shoehorned in multiplayer modes because everyone was trying to get around the trade-in thing. So how can you avoid a trade-in? You only get this free online access if you buy the game new. If you buy it used, the code could have already been claimed by the previous owner, and you have to pay money to get access to the multiplayer content. So it was this whole bad situation that we've kind of grown through as an industry, as the gaming industry has moved on. So I think the beta testing has gone with that. And that was why I went on that little rant, was because we're not seeing that. You're right. It is getting better. And so the practice should exist. And I wish it would go back to looking at why you need a beta test. I totally understand why like Destiny would need a beta test because it's so online oriented. Like Outriders would need a beta test, or like, but then you have Zelda, Breath of the Wild. It would not be an episode of 80-Bit Pod Smash if we don't talk about Breath of the Wild. Instead of having an outsourced, we are. Instead of having an entire like outsourced to the player masses beta test, what they did instead was freeze development every 2 weeks, and every single person at every aspect of the development cycle stopped developing and played the game. And that's artists, that's developers, that's Q&A, testers, that's the CE level, like corporate, like everyone from the like non-technical person to the most technical person and back were all just not allowed to work on the game, but play it from beginning to end as much as they could. And that was how they tested it internally. And look at Breath of the Wild, look how it turned out. Like, that's wonderful. So that's, beta testing still happened, it just wasn't publicly facing. And I feel like the old days of, if you got into a beta test, it was for the super fans. Like the beta testing was for super fans. I remember like getting into Counter-Strike beta tests, or even trying to, or like the World of Warcraft stress test was a thing. Because beta tests weren't handed out handed out every game that comes out. Like everything's beta. Here's a beta, pre-order. Like that's problematic. And I think the industry is changing because we've talked about that so much. I think the consumer voice has gotten loud enough that like pre-order access to a beta test or an early access is now not ubiquitously a good thing. And so I think it's becoming a little more nuanced in how and which games, the more online ones, the more games as a servicey things, of course, are going to have your beta tests and pre-order bonuses. Whereas your big single player titles, you don't see so much of the shoehorned in multiplayer aspect, which would require a beta test added. So you get more quality games. And so like, yes, beta tests should continue in that trajectory. I think we're headed in a good direction, and that's what I think. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think that it depends on the game, right? Are you going to have a lot of people logging into the game at once? You definitely need a network test and a stress test.
Yes.
And those are two separate things, right? There's the network test is a stress test, but the stress test also tests the CPU resources on your servers for whatever they're doing. Like, so they are kind of two separate things. I've never been using them interchangeably. But then, if you're just doing if it's a single player game, primarily single player game, like then it probably doesn't need a network test. Games like Elden Ring, the From Software affair, are a little tricky because you got the messaging system, which you probably need to be tested. People are still logging into servers for those, the asynchronous multiplayer aspects. But I feel like that could have been done on a lower level. Didn't really need network tests for that. It didn't really need a closed one or lottery done one in the first place. Could it have used a PvP test? Could it have used a test for people? Like, they should have invited a bunch of hackers at the beginning to try to identify all the hacking crap that's going on now. Like, that would have been great back for them to do back in September instead of, like, you know, weeks after the game's already launched. So, like, that's kind of the thing that, you know, it's like expand testing to beyond just like, oh, let's try to catch the bugs, to the people who are like, let's try to break, like, what are the ways they're going to break the game illegally, right? Because, you know, if you're testing just the legal ways or just the gameplay ways of breaking the game, you're going to miss a whole round of testing that needs to be done on, like, are your servers secure enough? Because as we mentioned in our wartime episode, that kind of thing's probably going to ramp up as nations go into conflict. Yeah, just like, those are the kinds of tests that I think are probably more worthwhile investing into than just the old beta test the way we used to do it. Is it fun to get games early? Absolutely. But, like, games have release dates for a reason, right? Because they take so long to make and they're so unfinished throughout the whole process. They're not a kind of product that's like, yeah, like, if you're baking a pizza, you could kind of probably pick at the pepperonis, but if you're baking cookies, you're not supposed to eat the cookie dough early before it's baked, before it's done, because you might get sick, right? I feel like video games are closer to the latter, right? Like you don't want to get sick before the product is done. You don't want to be picking at it before it's done, unless you have the right mindset going into it, or unless you're a professional that is, like, trained to what to look for to be the best use of the developer's time and resources. Or if you're doing a stress test to just, like, the game is done, it's ready to go for the most part, we're just testing the final components that have to do with the user-facing side of things. Like, I feel like those are the contexts in which it's appropriate. So, cool, awesome. Well, that is it. What are your beta test stories? What cool beta tests did you get in that were, like, life-changing experiences for you? What were ones that were miserable and stupid and you wish you hadn't participated? Are there any beta tests out there that, like, changed your mind positively or negatively towards a game? And what do you think about this practice? Do you think it's worth continuing, or are you like Penguin and Termite and want to see the entire process refined a bit better? You can share all those thoughts and more, and Termite will remind you where you can do all that.
You can remind me that Overwatch 2 is a thing, because I completely forgot, and there's a beta happening on April 26th over at 80bitpodsmash.com, 80bitpodsmash.com is our landing website with links to all of our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, Twitter, as well as our Discord server. And there are links to all of our podcasting platforms to get access to this episode that drops, this show that has weekly episodes dropping at midnight on Mondays at 80bitpodsmash.com. That's our RSS feed link there as well. Throw it into any app you would like. I thought it would be fun to talk about what beta tests are going on that are kind of the high profile ones. And Overwatch 2 is on the list, as well as Skull and Bones, if you remember. Assassin's Creed Black
that's
Flag.
Not coming out. That never comes out. That's
this is what's funny. That's why I'm talking about this. It's because that the ship combat version or mode that was in Assassin's Creed 4 was a spin-off game, entirely full-blown online game called Skull and Bones. It was the beta test has been running since 2017. 5 years later, beta. Yes, is now, and it's still ongoing, and it's still a thing apparently. And the game is not officially released. There's also another game called Escape from Tarkov that has gotten some publicity. Also announced, started beta testing in July 2017. So 2 other games that have been in perpetual beta, as well as, of course, Overwatch 2, which is probably the biggest name on this list. But there's other betas going on. It's ridiculous, some of these things. So tell us what you're playing, what you beta tested, your life-changing experiences with beta tests, and how they affect your gaming decisions at 80bitpodsmash.com.
All right, awesome. Next week, we have an episode, and it is going to be about... Next week, we're going to be doing an episode on video game adaptations. You may say, didn't you already do that? You are right. We did already do that. We talked about like the best video game adaptations, and which we did talk a little bit about which like source material mediums we wanted to see more of. We're actually going to be talking about source material itself in this episode. So we're going to be talking about like what kinds of games do different source materials tend to make, and like which source materials are the best like to invest in when adapting video games. So that is kind of our bent. It's kind of a similar, once again, like this one is kind of the similar topic to one we've done before, but it's a bit more refined after, time mulling over and thinking over it. We're like, that could be a whole different topic on itself. So source material, video game adaptations, and how that affects the game's development.
Love it.
We'll see you then.
Can't wait to see you next week.